Welcome to On the Issues. I'm Councilman Jim Waring. And joining me today is Acting Director of the city's Budget and Research Department, Jeff Barton. Jeff, thanks so much for coming. We really appreciate it. We've had Mario on, your esteemed predecessor, before, sort of explaining to citizens about the budget process and where we stand for this specific year. Obviously, in your case, we also have the pension issue is looming large with a potential vote if the state legislature passes a potential, I hate to say fix because that implies that all problems will be fixed, but certainly it's a good start at the very least on what if it passes and if voters approve it in May, and helping us address our problems. So those are probably some of the issues we'll discuss today. We want to talk a little bit though about your job and your role in this process and where we are in the process and how citizens can participate.
Okay. Sounds good.
Yeah.
So, Councilman, my role as new Acting Budget and Research Director is to ensure that we have the resources there to provide the services that the citizens depend on and that you as the council members have set the policy for us to deliver. Over the next couple of months, we'll be going out to the community with our budget hearings. We're right in the midst of our program budget process, which is a very integral process, or part of our zero-based budget process. Right now, we're meeting with all of our departments on their potential program reductions, if in fact we would have to make those. And it's interesting to note that we do those regardless of whether or not we have a surplus or a deficit. It's a very key component of the zero-based budget process.
And so from there, about March, right, the city manager puts out the trial budget.
Correct.
And that's the one people respond to at our meetings. So you want to talk a little bit about kind of how that comes together,
Sure.
the purpose of that, and then where we go from there.
Sure. So just kind of put into context where we are on the calendar, we'll be coming back to the council on February 23rd with an updated 5-year forecast and an official general fund status for the next fiscal year. From there, we go to the March 22nd city manager's trial budget. That trial budget is really, again, it's out there to let residents and citizens know these are the services that we could possibly provide if we have additional resources. If we have a surplus, that's what we would do. If we have a deficit, we'd be looking to possibly modify the services that we provide, possibly making reductions and things of that nature. So we go through a very detailed list. This year we asked departments, non-public safety departments, to identify 7% of their budget for potential reduction. We also asked our public safety criminal justice departments to identify 5%. And so we're going through those meetings now. Departments are asked to submit cards that won't impact the community as much. So basically ranking from the bottom up, if you will. And so we'll go through a series of meetings with the mayor, with the council, not with the council, I'm sorry, with the city manager's office to kind of rank those programs. And then we'll put those on a list, and that ultimately goes out as the trial budget, goes out in the newspaper and the tabloids, and then we have a series of community budget hearings. Those hearings are tentatively starting this year on March 29th, and they'll conclude on April 19th. I believe we have 15 hearings confirmed at this point in time. We had 12 last year, so we're going to do 3 more this year than we did last year.
I think we have several different versions of this. I know I'm doing 2 in my district. We've always had, I don't want to impose upon your time, but Mario, when the budget is actually sort of firmed up, Mario has always come back also to explain. So we've really sort of had 3 budget hearings in my district. As you said, the other districts are having these meetings as well. I believe there's one on the telephone. You can also weigh in on computer.
Yes,
maybe talk about
we've done the online hearing. Last year we opted not to do that for, I think, logistical reasons, but we have an online, it's almost like I think we've called it in the past a Twitter town hall. We've called it an online hearing with the mayor.
So you can make your comments without actually going to a meeting.
Definitely. You can submit them on email, and you can do that all throughout the process. They send those questions and comments to our general BRD mailbox, and we submit those in with our packet that goes to the council that basically are the minutes from all of our hearings. So we gather all those comments from the residents, and it's a really important process for us to hear that feedback from our residents. And when the trial budget goes out to what ultimately gets adopted by the council, it usually is different. And usually the difference is the feedback that we hear from the community. You know, you got several different special interest groups that come out, Friends of the Library, the Phoenix spokespeople, the arts groups. They all come out there to advocate for their particular services. And I think in the end, it actually helps us with the budget and refining where we're pointing those resources to.
Now, we talked a little bit about the citizen input. We're a city of about 1.5 million, 1.6 million, somewhere in there. So we're a big city. Each district has roughly 200,000 people. We don't get a ton of participation at the budget hearings. We try to advertise, we try to send out the word, it's in the newspaper. I think it was 2 years ago, I had the highest number. They were very proud of me to have the highest number, and I think it was 13 people had come to my budget hearing, so that's a little disappointing. But to your point, the citizen input does get tallied, right? I mean, it gets added up, it gets presented to us in a very formal format. So realistically, there is an opportunity for citizens out there who are interested in weighing in on their city's budget because not that many people participate. I think we had maybe 1,000 or 2,000 comments last year.
Something like that, yes.
Yeah, so again, the city of 1.5, 1.6 million people, it's not a very high percentage, but if you're looking for an upside in that, at least if you do go to participate, you're definitely going to get a chance to talk. You're certainly welcome to talk at these meetings, answer questions. Just so people know, we usually have, if not the budget director, such an august personage as yourself, we have either the city manager, department heads, the deputy city managers. We usually have people who are extremely high rank within the city structure, know the budgets inside and out, have lots of years of experience, and know the budget, such as yourself, inside and out. So if you want to learn more, it's a great opportunity, and I appreciate always the staffers who participate. Now, we've talked a lot on this show with the city manager and others and your predecessor, and certainly at council meetings about the budget situation. Mm-hmm. So do you want to give us, and keep in mind, please, in the audience, this is a taped show, yes. So things can change on a dime, but right now, as we sit here talking about February 3rd, how is the budget looking?
Again, I'll go back in time, kind of walk us through where we are currently, Councilman. Back in September, we came to you with a year-end status from last fiscal year, 14-15, and at that point in time, we talked to you about how we ended fiscal year 14-15, and it put us on a good trajectory as we looked ahead.
It was better than you had anticipated.
It was better than we anticipated.
About $25 million?
$25 million, you were exactly correct, and a lot of that was basically reduced expenditures. A lot of that was from vacancies. We had a lot of vacancies at that point in time, and we still are carrying a lot of those vacancies. Those savings are helping us to balance our budget. But if you go rewind back to February of last year when we did our 5-year forecast, then we were talking about a potential deficit for 16-17 in the range of $31 to $58 million. So what we committed to you and the council at that point in time in September was that we were going to go back, we're going to do everything that we could and sharpen our pencils. So as we went through the budget process earlier this fall in October and November timeframe, we go through our technical review process, and that's where we as analysts go through every line item in the department's budgets and try and trim those down to a more reasonable level in line with what they've spent historically. And as a result of that, we were able to eliminate that deficit for 16-17, and Ed and I, City Manager Zerker and I mentioned in our council meeting on December 15th that deficit was gone, and we were pretty confident that it was gone. And not only was it gone, we still had the residual savings from 14-15, that $25 million. That's where we are right now. We're still dusting off our revenue numbers at this point. That's the really last piece before we set the estimate for 16-17. So over the next couple of weeks, we're still waiting on those holiday sales tax numbers, because that's a really big component of our revenue as we look forward. December and January sales from the holiday. Once we have those, we'll be carrying those into that meeting on February 23rd to help us set that estimate. But again, right now, 16-17 is balanced, and we have a potential surplus, one-time dollars of $25 million.
So you talked a little bit about the revenue numbers and so forth. Citizens read, obviously in the paper, stock market's been down this year. That impacts us, but there's not necessarily a direct correlation. If you follow the state finances, they're doing pretty well right now compared to where things had been. You want to talk about some of those interrelationships?
Sure.
And how that gets us to where we are?
Sure. Our revenue our general fund revenue is composed of a variety of different things. The biggest component, local sales tax, is about 41%. Our state shared tax, which is our state taxes, they're about 13%. So again, the volatility that you mentioned earlier in terms of the market, people's confidence, their ability to spend and have discretionary income, job growth, all those things play into that. And
oil prices.
I mean,
definitely. So with my coupon from one of the local grocery stores, I think I paid 86 cents a gallon the other day. I was excited. That was the first time I'd cracked $1, even with the coupon.
Right, and just like you're saving on your gas,
absolutely.
We as a city are also saving.
Well, I track my expenses every month. I definitely, I'm right there with the national average. I must be driving a lot.
Yeah.
So, but it does matter, and it puts more money in people's pockets.
It does.
And it does bolster the economy, even though it hasn't necessarily, and that's part of the reason I mention it. The stock market then has a different reaction, but the individual consumer could, to our benefit, potentially spend more money.
And to your point earlier, in terms of the confidence, last year this time we were making more difficult decisions with our revenue. You remember we started off last fiscal year, we had to make a revenue reduction of about $15 million. That also, we didn't have to do that this year. That's a good thing. Right now, based on 6 months of revenue collections, we're actually targeting and tracking to budget. And I think a lot of that comes from some of the scrutiny and some of the critique that we've gotten from the council members in the past. You in particular,
A couple of years ago, we had an issue about the revenue estimates were way above what other cities were doing and so forth. So we had talked about that, and I do think the adjustment has been appropriate, and I'm pleased to hear that it may have paid off in some small way.
I think it did. I think the recommendations that you put forward, we're now contracting with U of A to get some additional economic insight. I think last year's revenue estimates, we were 0.2% off, and I think a lot of that has to do with, again, the questions that you asked, you keep us honest, as well as having that insight from the
Every point's about $10 million,
it is.
I remember.
It is.
So 0.2 is off, but it's not way off.
It's right.
If you miss it by a point, and I'm not saying you guys should be perfect prognosticators in any way, but I thought we need to polish and refine our system, because if you're off by 3-4 points,
it's big money.
First, that's a big miss, but second, it's $40 million. And so, so it is great that we have kind of a better grasp of what things are. You're giving us, more timely reports. I guess I'd say we're focusing on this more. So if you're looking for a ray of sunshine in an otherwise cloudy day, we've had issues in the past. We've had to address those. Unfortunately, some of the methods, the tax increases or the fee increases and the parking increases and so forth, I was against. But I do think it caused us more focus, because nobody wanted to go through that again. I think it's caused more focus that I think is paying off now.
Right, and I think one of your other questions too in those times were, how are we comparing ourselves to other cities? We weren't really doing a lot of that. And I think everyone thought of Phoenix as the big dog in the room.
Our analysis was a lot different than the other cities were doing, and they were pretty consistent. So that was a worrisome thing too.
But I think now with our contract with U of A, we're getting access to that information, because there are several cities that also participate in that information sharing. So we can see those trends. We can see what's Scottsdale and Chandler and Gilbert, what are they expecting as far as sales tax growth, and we can compare ourselves to kind of see, are we in the ballpark, or are we way off on the limb somewhere? And I think that was a good point that you brought up, and it's definitely paying off.
I guess when you really look at it in a whole, the pension issue is causing a lot of our economic distress. If we were just sort of static, that would save tens of millions of dollars. It's amazing when you look at the numbers, and I'll let you do it because you're the numbers guy, but I've put some of those numbers out there for the newspaper and other media outlets, just to show citizens how dramatically this line is going up. It's just not a sustainable course. It's not. So the legislature is taking some action. The city has taken some action. I thought we got started a little too late. Maybe we didn't do quite as much as we could have, but at least with the non-police and fire employees, we've at least capped, is that a fair word? Maybe cap, because that sounds like a hard ceiling, but definitely what you're seeing is a flattening of that trend dramatically. Not so with the police and fire, who are run out of the state system. Obviously, as I said, there's a bill in the legislature. Check me if I'm wrong, but our overall general fund budget is about $1.1 billion, $1.2 billion, somewhere in there. So if you're seeing increases of $50 million every couple of years,
it's tough.
That's about 5% of our budget, and that's sort of where we're in the ballpark right now. How much do you think this bill could help potentially? I know you don't have hard numbers, but
well, I think the bill helps in many instances, in many ways. Number one, it's going to stop, from what we understand, and again, this is our interpretation on what we have available to us now, is it's going to stop the growth in the unfunded liability, because it's effectively going to close Tier 1 and Tier 2 plan. And work for, going forward, the new employees will be in a new system, quote unquote, so to speak. And so those employees are going to split that cost, the pension cost, with the employers, 50-50. And
right now the employees are capped at 11.85 or something like that.
And so going forward,
that's a big difference.
That is a big difference. So
for taxpayers, it's a huge difference.
It's a huge difference. So going forward, that cap and splitting that cost at the normal cost rate is big. The other thing that it looks like they've done in this bill, and I think is a good step in the right direction, is the rates that the employer and the employee will pay for these new employees starting January 1st of 2017. They won't have to pay any of that unfunded liability from the old system. So it keeps the cost at a rate that the employee and the employer can both tolerate. And I think that's huge. And to your point again, pension cost is huge. When we talked to you back in December, we showed you, revenue has gone up since 07-08 by about $23 million. Our pension costs in the general fund in that same time frame have increased by almost $97 million.
When you factor in inflation as well, I mean, for real purposes, real dollars, we actually have a lot less money to spend.
We do, you're right.
Even though it looks like we have the same amount of money. Now, it's also a problem that our economy is still pretty much where it was almost getting on towards 10 years ago when things were really going good. Obviously, people are aware of the Great Recession, so there's no reason to belabor that. But certainly, it puts a strain on our budgets.
It does.
So maybe talk just a little bit about when we spend money on the pensions, if there wasn't a fix, for example, what does that do to everything else? I mean, you talked about the different departments we have, but it's police, fire. I mean, it has a real impact, right, on what we can hire and what we can do.
It does. You know, we've been going through this balancing plan with police and fire since 2010. You know, we haven't hired officers since 2008, 2009 timeframe, firefighters and police officers. So we're dealing with a limited amount of resource. So it's a math problem to us. You know, if you've got your costs are X and you've got revenue coming in at X, you got to have those two things balanced. Well, if you can't control the cost, then you're having to, you know, if you can't have more revenue in, then you're starting to have to cut things. And right now we're shifting more of our budget because what we're cutting are those non-public safety. Because again, what's critical to the community, what's critical to council is public safety, criminal justice. So we start to make shifts. We cut the admin departments, we'll cut some of the parks and rec programs and some of the library programs. What it means is it shifts more costs to the public safety areas. And then it becomes even more and more challenging to balance that budget when you've got that level of, you know, dollars going in that direction.
Well, and to their credits, I think the police and fire unions, I think all of them, I guess I can't speak to that, but I've been down at the legislature, I was at frankly the legislature this morning about that bill. They were having a hearing, and I believe the finance committee. You know, I think to their credit, they have recognized that this is a problem that does impact the citizens. Frankly, it impacts their members and how many members of theirs there will be. Right. And so it seems like most groups are on board. I do think there's some technical things to work out and so forth, but I know we don't know how much this could potentially do for our bottom line. Right. But I know it definitely can't hurt. No. And it is desperately needed. We've been talking about this for quite a while, and I'm glad to see that there's finally action. I know you as budget director are probably relieved too, because it cuts down on the number of really hard choices that you have to make. But so speaking of choices going forward, because a lot of this change that we're talking about is going to happen after this coming fiscal year that we're talking about having meetings about and so forth. So you do 5-year estimates, you do projections. What's the future hold for Phoenix?
Well, you know, I think again, Phoenix has to come to grips with its new reality. You know, in years past, we would grow leaps and bounds above everybody else in the nation. I think those days are gone for the most part. I think we have to accept now that we're going to grow pretty much like everyone else grows for the most part. So we've got to kind of keep that in mind. I think in the past we used to do 5-year forecasts. We weren't really managing to those as well. I think over the last 3 to 4 years when we've been doing this, we've been more attuned to making decisions for the long term. You know, we get these one-time pots of money like the $25 million that we saved last fiscal year, just making sure that we don't commit ourselves to an ongoing cost with using one-time revenue or one-time resources. And I think that's where the 5-year forecast really comes in handy for us, because it gives the council members, the policymakers, and us as department heads, it gives us an opportunity to kind of see where are we going, what's that trajectory, where should we start to scale back, where may we have a problem, and let's start addressing that problem early. You know, when we talk to you in a couple of weeks, we're going to be focusing in on 16, 17, 17, 18, all the way through 2021. Well, if we see any problems or challenges in those years, we got multiple years to deal with it. And I think that's the way the 5-year forecast really needs to be used, as a blueprint or a guide, a roadmap, if you will, for us as we look ahead.
Well, and people really seem to get caught off guard, and that's why I was happy, you know, when we've got now more sort of in-your-face reporting. You know, we've got more at policy, we've got more budget proposals, or not proposals, excuse me, but reports than we ever had before. People really seem to be caught off guard. Members of the council seem to be caught off guard a couple of years ago. You know, at the state, we got more regular updates, and that was why I sort of always went to the state, and I knew trouble was brewing, which is why I harped on it so much. But it is heartening to hear that we are talking more about not using the one-time, for example, because in the late 90s, and I don't know what year it was long before I was on the council, and you were probably still in college, but if you forgive me for saying it, but the green street signs that people see at particularly the big intersections are now starting to chip, they're starting to go out, and so forth. There's a problem. They said it's about a quarter of those signs, not necessarily as much as my district, but I've also had complaints. So when I checked, it was one-time money that was used to put in those signs with no policy of follow-up, fixing them, or anything else. And we have to, as you say, use public safety first. That includes street transportation. So if they have a street that's cracking or might lead to an accident or tip over a bike rider or something like that, we have to address that first. I think that's what hopefully most citizens would want. But at the same time, the street signs look schlocky, and we don't like that. But I was shocked to find that there is no money to replace it. It's not something that came up my first year, but they're just now starting to sort of get towards failure. It's something Ed Zerker, the city manager, and I have both noticed and both commented on. So for citizens who complained about that, we are trying to get it fixed. But we shouldn't do that anymore. I always argued against that at the state legislature, and I hope going forward we're not going to see those kind of mistakes, because it leaves council people 10 years from now sort of hanging. It does. And we don't want that. It sounds like we've got a better grasp on things than we did in the past. I don't know how long you've been with the department, but so this may be an unfair question, but we did make some changes really right when I was coming to the council. I think mostly due to the work of Bill Gates and Thelda Williams, two of my esteemed colleagues. Bill certainly worked a lot on the efficiencies and everything, and that's really helped. Definitely. I know the city manager really cracks down on you guys. Everybody was wearing their pennies for a while. I don't see yours today, but I won't tell him, don't worry. But he's always got his penny on to remind people that, hey, we're trying to save, kind of wring everything we can out of this cloth that is our system. But you want to talk about the changes that we had and a little more what I would consider maybe zero-based budgeting, or at least an effort to get to that point. Yeah,
I think the inventory of programs, which actually you will have on in your hands next week, on February 9th, we'll be delivering that document to you.
Something to look forward to. It's like Christmas coming early. This is fantastic.
It's a big document, so if you've got stock in paper, go buy it now, because we're going to print lots of those. But what that is, Councilman, it's our document that we've been doing for a couple years, based on the feedback from Councilwoman Thelda Williams. I think was very instrumental in us moving down that path. But it's a very clear document, and it comes out at a very key time in the year. We give you this document that outlines all the programs, all the resources that go into them, service metrics in terms of how those programs are performing, the number of staff allocated to those, and things of that nature.
And for the citizens at home, it's online.
It's online.
It's online, but it's also, I think, pretty user-friendly.
Oh, I think so.
You can see, so a couple of years ago, how many staffers did we have in this department? How much were we spending? Some of the things we were accomplishing. And now we're spending this amount of money. We have this many employees. Maybe it's less, maybe it's more. But they go through each department. Now, it's a budget that's over $1 billion. So I'm not saying it's a short document or that you want to sit there and try to take it all in one night, although some people do claim that they do that. But I think it's to your guys' credit to have a manageable document with all that information that I think citizens can also use. So where would they go online to find it?
So they go online to the BRD website. So if you go to phoenix.gov/budget, it's one of the links off to the side. You'll see it. It'll be in a very prominent place. But again, it comes out at this time of year because we're, again, building up to that trial budget, right? So in the past, some of the council members had some concerns, and I think you may have even addressed this too. What context are you giving us these changes in? I don't know how many programs I have that fit this category. Sorry to interrupt,
at the state, we always had a context. You know, kind of what did we do last year, maybe the last couple of years, what are we planning to do next year, and what are you recommending right now? And it was enormously helpful.
Right, this document gives you that context. So if we're talking about...
Which I don't think existed, and that's part of the reason I'm asking the question.
It did not.
You know, everything was kind of out of context. We put in those street signs last year, but then nobody's thinking about who is going to replace them, what staff do we have allocated to that, is there somebody responsible for it, and now here we are with no, it sounds like probably a small issue, but it's an important one to people in the communities, and it's a very visible thing for our visitors for the Super Bowls and national championships games that we have on a pretty regular basis. So it just shows that if you don't necessarily think down the road, which we are trying to do a lot more of, with your help, obviously it's very important. So. But you're enjoying your job? I forget how long you've been.
I've been acting for 7 months now. I'm enjoying it.
I know it was less than a year because Mario was sitting in this chair last year. So, but you had a background in finance?
I've been in budget and research for 14 years. Prior to that, I was in the city auditor department. So I started as an internal auditor, worked my way up to a senior level auditor, and went to budget and research as a management assistant too, and worked my way up to deputy, and now ultimately acting budget director.
I'm impressed you've been at the city all that period of time. I take back what I said about being in college in the late 90s. Clearly you were working here, so congratulations on that. But been here a lot longer than I. But it just seems like we're doing more with less.
We are.
You want to talk about, I wanted to ask this, so I'm glad we got a couple minutes to discuss it with really any director of a department. But but it's a more streamlined operation than it's been before. I think we've talked a little bit on the show before. We used to have about 17,000 plus employees, and now we've got 14,000 plus. So it's a big change.
Correct.
It costs, and I'm saying this from memory, for the average employee, is it about $106,000?
That's if you roll in public safety employees with the civilian employees. Yes.
Now, police, I think it's more like 140,000,
yeah, it's a little
right?
higher.
So they tend to, fire and police, you got to have a special school,
Correct.
a lot of equipment.
Correct.
Salaries tend to be a little higher. Frankly, educational attainment's a little higher. So obviously there's risks in that job, which I think people understand. So they tend to get paid more. Yes. So that boosts the thing.
Average up.
But it's $106,000 an employee with the pension costs and the healthcare costs going up, of course. You know, we're not saving as much as the 3,000 person drop in our rolls really implies. I was kind of shocked at how little that actually saved us for a couple of years ago under the previous city manager. But I do think the future, given, I hate to say austerity because that sounds like we're being cheap, but we're being a lot more efficient.
Yes.
Different departments, we're using computers and technology. But you talked about the vacancies. And could you explain just a little bit, because that's a word that comes up in our budget discussions that I don't think the general public probably understands completely.
Sure. So we've got 14,000 employees. At any given point in time, some of those positions are not filled. That's what a vacancy is to us. Our budget process, just to kind of educate the public, and you know this because you've been through this many times. When we do our budget and develop our budget, we forecast the cost of all of our positions, filled or not filled. Then we go through a very rigorous process to evaluate how many of those positions are currently vacant and will remain vacant based on your historical trends, based on turnover, all of those things. Then we input into the budget what's called salary savings, and that's essentially a credit to reduce those costs. And that's what we budget and plan for. Now, what we've been experiencing over the last couple of years as a result of some of the labor negotiations and some of the concessions that employees have taken, we've seen more employees leave the city than historical. Last year, over 700 people left. I think there's possibly 500 or so that can go this year. So that adds to the number of vacant positions, or unfilled positions, if you will.
So I think we're in a pretty decent place compared to maybe what we expected at the beginning of this fiscal year. We still have to be vigilant. We have to get a grip. If I'm trying to summarize our conversation, we have to get a grip on the pension issue for police and fire, for sure. You know, really hoping that things go well down at the legislature and that voters have a chance to weigh in on this. But you know, things are better than we might have expected given where we were a couple of years ago, talking about deficits and so forth. So I appreciate all your efforts on this, but again, the citizens have a chance to ask you these questions directly at our meetings, and we will try to publicize those to the extent that we can. I appreciate so much you being here to help educate the public. Thank you.
Anytime, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And if you have any questions or comments, please call my office at 602-262-7445 or visit my website at phoenix.gov/district2, and we look forward to seeing you next time on The Issues.